Hey, welcome to another live stream. Haven't done one of these in a few weeks, as some of you might have known or heard. I went to London for Star Wars Celebration, and so I was able to do a whole bunch of sightseeing and museums and historic sites. Prior to and after that, I got to go to Disneyland Paris, and I had a lot of great experiences out there. And it kind of reminds me to remind you all, go out and do things that maybe are outside of your experience, or see new things. Constantly try to see new things. I really I learned so much for going out to various places that were of historical value, or putting myself in the shoes of people through their items and museums. And it's going to add a lot to some of the stories I'm working on. So for those who are new, or don't know, feel free to ask questions in the comments here. If you're watching live, I'll try to answer them now. If you are watching it later and leave a comment, I'll try to pick it up for next time. And that actually kind of brings me to the first question, which was a question that kind of came after the live stream last time. And it's sort of a long question, so I wanted to read it. And it's from a gentleman named Dan Rudd. It says, I have a question less about the act of writing itself and more about your lived experience. Some places are really hostile to artistic or creative pursuits. For example, I grew up in a small, rugby-obsessed town in rural New Zealand where doing anything creative was seen as sissy or just a waste of time. I think it kind of inculcated in me a sense that creative writing is indulgent, selfish, and childish, which rationally I understand is not true, but I still get a twinge of that every time I sit down to write, and sometimes abandon a project because of those feelings. There are better things you could be doing with your time. Have you experienced any of that? What was it like for you growing up a creative? For me, growing up a creative, I kind of grew up in that sort of environment. I had a father who really didn't encourage my creative endeavors. He was very much into sports and very competitive, and he and I didn't get along the best. So for him, it was that we had to spend our time, all of the time, had to be something productive, and usually that came in the form of cleaning something or working on a reconstruction project, because the house was always currently, in a state of disrepair because he was remodeling constantly. And we were sort of, us kids were his slave labor, in that, we were his free labor that he got to use to accomplish that the whole time. And so I had to, writing was something that I knew I wanted to do a lot more of once I'd had some creative writing classes in junior high. And so it became like a chance of I had to sneak away to write and to read. So I literally, there were times where I would lock myself in a closet. My brothers, my two little brothers, they had bedrooms next to each other, and a walk-in closet that joined their rooms that was pretty well lit and pretty spacious. And I would actually go and hide in there and write on legal pads, because telling stories was something I needed to do at that young age. I tried writing at that point a Star Wars novel on legal pads like that, hiding in that closet from my dad, terrified he was going to force me to do some other bit of extra work. So I'm acutely familiar with that feeling that writing is somehow not valuable to people who don't understand how to value it. But the thing that kind of helped get me over that was, there are so many representations in media of people who look and sound like me being writers. I was able to read about the horrible lives that Fitzgerald or Hemingway or any of these other writers that they'd lived, and could apply that to myself and say, well, if they got through all of this, I could too. Or even George Lucas, how he kind of he and his dad sort of were at odds about what he should be doing with his life and things. And so I kind of understood that, and reading all those stories that it was something to overcome really helped me get into a mindset that I wasn't wasting my time when I was doing it. And part of it has been bred into me the idea that of course self-expression is not a waste of time. And I had to realize that when someone was, like in the example Dan gave, you know, we were in a town where rugby was a big deal. Really, it comes down to those sports or self-expression, right? Those are much more physical, but everyone has a form of self-expression, whether that's building models or writing or reading, or, everybody has that thing that calms them down or helps them express some part of themselves. And I realized for me it was writing, and that it didn't matter what anybody else said, because I could look at what they did and I could look at what I wanted to do and see that we got the same result. And I thought mine was more productive because at the end I had a product I could do something with. I had a story that I could show other people, that could express something, that could help teach someone something else. Another thing that really helped me get through that idea was the work of John Steinbeck, to be honest. Steinbeck wrote a lot about the plight of people in that lost sort of class, Grapes of Wrath was very much about the Dust Bowl and the Depression era. And I think he used that to turn people's opinions about who these people were and humanized them and humanized their plight in a way that actually changed the course of events in American, the American psyche. I think Charlie Chaplin and the Three Stooges did the same thing. And I kind of think that proletariat sort of, here's what the little person is going through brand of literature and movies is something that we're missing in today's society. If you think about the Three Stooges and the shorts they were making in the Depression, how does every short begin? They're drifters who are unemployed and looking for a job, and they're down on their luck, and that was sort of just the mood of the country at the time. And I think that the Tramp was the same way. So that their art and the stories that they told had a worth to society. You look at any art that sort of changed the course of history, 1984, Orwell, things like that. I think that helps remind you that writing can be important. But on the other hand, writing is something like if you therapists are big fans of telling people they need to write down their feelings and they need to get it out of them. And for a long time, for me, writing in my notebook was a form of therapy, right? Getting the feelings that were inside of me out on the page. It was a way to get them out of me. There were definitely times where there were situations and things in my life that I had to deal with and process and work through. And I wrote stories about it. I've written so many stories about my childhood to work through those feelings that what I was doing was without worth. It's something that I think a lot of writers have to deal with, especially when you're toiling away alone, just between you and a page, that you're trying to express yourself or do something. So, I think that's the case. If anyone watching has any questions about writing, I would be happy to answer any of those. There's quite a few of you in here now, and if you have any questions, I can answer those. But if not, I could just talk about some of the things in my my travels recently that really sort of inspired my writing. I think one of them was going on. I did a walking tour of all of the sites where Jack the Ripper killed his victims, and I would recommend that to anybody. It was really fascinating because you had a very knowledgeable guide taking you through the city in those very real places where these things happened, and it was fascinating to get context you don't necessarily hear about when you read the story. You hear about the idea that two different police departments were involved, you know, because the city was divided in the no, I haven't answered yours from last time, and I haven't come back with examples yet. I will work on that next time. But anyway, Jack the Ripper. You know, you hear about the two different police departments, but that you don't realize that what divided that line between the police departments was the London Wall, which is this wall the Romans built in 200. And to go through and actually see it there, and to see where that line of demarcation was, and then to be able to walk from one side of the wall where things still seem more affluent than to the other side of the wall, where some of the buildings that were there still exist, and you kind of get a flavor of what life must have been like at that point. It's just, it's definitely stuff I'm going to be able to use in my writing. And, you know, the Tower of London was another place, you know, going to the spot where Anne Boleyn and Lady Jane Grey had been executed, or the spot, the Bloody Tower, where Richard III most likely killed those boys, or had those boys killed, or Churchill's war rooms, you know, being and standing in the space where Churchill was making decisions about World War II. Get to places like that. Go see places like that. There's plenty of places everywhere in the world that have some historical significance in trying to... What is writing other than trying to see through the eyes of other people and going to places where history took place and looking through the eyes of the people in the places where they were is a really great way to sort of capture that for yourself. You know, I remember when I was 17, I got a very significant feeling of this. I went to Independence Hall in Philadelphia, and I walked in and was just sort of overcome by what it looked and felt like to be standing in the room where they drafted the Constitution. It was bizarre and marvelous, and I really love that connection to history that it can give us, and that's something I try to replicate in my writing, is to have the context to make things wondrous. So I think that that's definitely interesting. Are there any other questions from the audience before we wrap up? And Anna, I'm sorry I didn't have the examples. I've been traveling, as I said, and we'll work to get those next time, and I will definitely get those. But if no one has any other questions, we can just wrap up, and I will say, please go over to Patreon and support my short story Patreon. The first short story's up, and I think it turned out really well. It's about a little girl seeking treasure, and she runs into a dragon. And that's, you can go to patreon.com/Swankmotron. You can follow me at Swankmotron on Twitter. Obviously, you're here, you follow me on Facebook, and then please go to my website, bryanyoungfiction.com, or go to Amazon and just look me up and buy some of my books and review them, and do that. That would be very helpful to me. So thank you very much for listening to me ramble for the last 10 or 15 minutes, and keep writing. So I gotta remember how to turn this thing off.